So for the purpose of this assignment, I decided to study the Philippines a little bit. So I got to interview my grandma, who was originally born in the Philippines and lived there until she was about 30 years old before she moved to the U.S. So to begin, I asked my grandmother about different microcultures within the Philippines. She mentioned that there really weren't any specific microcultures that she could think of, but there was kind of a divide between the eastern Philippines and the west, not eastern and western Philippines, but the east and the west in the Philippines, where the eastern cultures were considered more traditional, more tribal, and the western cultures kind of assimilated to American or westernized ideals of culture as far as media and beauty went, ways of running business. Um, so yeah, the Western culture was. She said it was more like Americanized. Next, I asked her about the religious beliefs in the Philippines, and she said that she grew up only knowing Christians. She didn't really know anyone of another religion. To be more specific, most of them were Roman Catholic. My grandmother was a Roman Catholic, but she became a Methodist when she moved to the United States. So she was still a Christian. She just went from Catholic to Methodist, and I was raised a Methodist as well. As a result. She described information rate as rather low load because of the lack of technology. Keep in mind, she's from a different generation. I'm not really sure what it's like in the Philippines now, but in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s, at least when she was growing up, they really didn't have a lot of television, magazines, anything like that. Really, not a lot of mass media. She described that she got most of her news from the radio. So um, you know, they kind of, the Filipinos are more naturalistic, I would say. So they take great pride in the environment. Um, they, I would describe it as harmonious between the Filipinos and the natural environment. They use the natural environment for fishing, hunting, building shops and homes. They don't tend to, cut down trees and burn the environment, kind of like how we see it as industrialization. They don't really do that as much. I mean, there is some of that. At least she was describing. They had a few factories here and there, and there was some deforestation, but for the most part, they kind of let things be, let nature do its thing, and they did their own thing along with nature. At least where she grew up, because she was kind of like in a small island, just like south of Manila. What else? My grandma said that she thought the privacy level of the Philippines was a little bit lower than that in America, and she described people as more friendly in the Philippines, and people are more willing to communicate with strangers than they are here. Here you see a stranger, you might, give them a little bit of an eye contact or a friendly smile or wave. That's about it. But like she says, Filipinos are more likely to just come up to you and make conversation even if they don't know you, which I thought was interesting. And I definitely noticed that in my grandmother as well. Like I said, she had access to radio, so th- that's really how she got her media, how she got her news. She described social distance in the Philippines as being more intimate than in the U.S. People are more touchy, she said, more likely to give hugs and especially like kisses on the cheeks, kisses on the hands as well. Um, and especially to those who are superior to them, like mothers, fathers, grandparents, especially, and great grandparents, would definitely get a kiss on the hand when you greeted them. And I'll get more towards that a little bit later here, but it's pretty important in their culture. At least that's how my grandmother described it. So the way in which my grandma described time makes me believe that the Filipinos were generally seen as polychronic because they're not, prompt. Not everything has to be exactly on time. It's okay for them to be a little early, a little bit late. They don't really like a lot of deadlines. They kind of like to take their time with things. Like it'll get done when it gets done. That's how she described it, at least. She's not like that at all, but she said when she lived in the Philippines, that's kind of what the culture seemed like down there. Um, she said people were a lot less stressed. They could multitask a lot easier than us Americans and not be as stressed about it. again, as far as categorization goes, Filipinos tend to divide themselves between East and West, and their culture varies depending on their location mostly. Like I said, she didn't really see anything with religion that was different. In the Philippines, it was mostly Roman Catholics. She also told me that she did not experience a lot of stereotyping while she was in the Philippines, but she did when she first moved to America. She said one of the stereotypes that really bugged her the most was that people just assumed she didn't know English, um, and she did. Tagalog was her primary language. That's what she learned first. But from the time she was in primary school, when she was about 4, 5, 6 years old, until today, English was her primary, not her primary, right, but her most used language, and she's fluent in it, very very fluent. She says she dreams in both Tagalog and English, so I think that's a sign that she's pretty bilingual there. Um, what else? Surprisingly, my grandmother said that the Filipino media often revolved around American culture. She said that she always heard about American politics and the presidents and the first lady and stuff like that, as well as celebrities like Audrey Hepburn and Marilyn Monroe. Um, and it seemed like people in the Philippines were interested in Western culture, specifically with people who had very high social status, who were kind of rich, like movie stars, and like I said, like the president of the United States and his first lady. People who lived kind of fancy. Like my grandma didn't get that. Like she lived in an island in a pretty much in a hut, so that to her was like, wow. I asked my grandmother if she viewed herself as ethnocentric, and I kind of had to explain what that was to her. And she said she really didn't. She said that she's always open to change, and she was able to assimilate to American culture, um, you know, pretty easily, and didn't hold. She's proud definitely to be Filipino, but she didn't hold that, I guess, against anyone. Um, and she was willing to change her culture around to fit more of the westernized American culture, without an issue. Um, she did say, however, that she thought overall that both Filipinos and Americans were very ethnocentric, but I think that's with most countries. She herself was not that way, and she tried raising myself and my mom to not be that way, but I'm sure I'm ethnocentric to some degree. I also asked my grandmother how to say hello in Tagalog, and it's kind of similar to the Spanish "como está." It's "como está," like just "como está." Um, and then I asked her what kind of nonverbal language was considered taboo in the Philippines, and this one is kind of hard for her to talk about. But um, when you go to a funeral, especially of a grandparent, you're expected to kiss the corpse on the hand, and if you refuse to do that, that's considered really disrespectful. But she kind of has a phobia of anything relating to death, whether it's corpses, coffins, ghosts, skeletons. Like she doesn't like a lot of Halloween decorations or anything. She thinks it stemmed from going to funerals and having to do that. So that was hard for her, having to not refuse that action because it was something that was terrifying to her, and I think it traumatized her a little bit. It made it hard on her. There's definitely some lasting effects there. She's afraid of ghosts and has holy water next to her bed and everything. Um, my grandma described love differently in the Philippines as well. In the U.S. than when considered in the U.S. People usually go through a courting period before getting married, kind of like people go through a dating period here, but it was more formal, more focused on religion, less focused on the physicality of a relationship, and more on getting to know a person. And like I said, being more formal. It was a lot more brief. It wasn't like years and years before someone got married, and there really wasn't an engagement. People just kind of got married. And so it was pretty quick from the time somebody decided to court to when they would get married. My grandmother got married when she was in the United States, though, so she never really she didn't tell me she courted anyone while she was in the Philippines. She said it's usually mutual, not forced, no arranged marriages that she knew of, and that's about it.